I think starting with introductions, we just go around the room. Heather, you want to get us started?
Sure. My name is Heather Jones. I'm non-binary and I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm a mezzo soprano and I am a singer with the Savannah Voice Festival. I was the Cheryl Milnes American Opera Award winner of the American Traditions Competition, voice competition in the spring of this year, 2021. And this is my first season singing with the Savannah Voice Festival. I am with so many friends, new and old, but lots of people that I've sung with before. But it's lovely to be here making music with them for the first time in Savannah.
Fabulous. And
Yay.
Jessica?
Hey, I'm Jessica Fishenfeld. I am the director this year of the Femme concert with the Savannah Voice Festival, for which I'm also singing in a couple of other concerts. This is my third or fourth year with the festival, with including or not including the virtual season. And yeah, like Heather, it's kind of just a big collaboration of friends who I love singing with. But I'm so happy to be directing this concert that is so topical and important for our women's and LGBTQ communities to shed some light into the Savannah communities about these topics.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Danny, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Hey, everybody. I'm Danny Jakubowski. She, her pronouns. I identify as a woman. Yeah, and I'm a professor over at SCAD. I teach art history and cinema studies classes, actually. These days, mostly art history, but sometime soon I'll get back to cinema studies when they need it again. Yeah, and I've been in Savannah for about 2 years exactly now. So moved here a little bit ago. And I was invited to be here with you guys by Dusty, and I'm glad to meet all of you. Yeah.
And Lawrence?
Hi, I'm Lawrence. I use he, they pronouns, and I am assisting with the Pride Festival this year. My day job is a data manager, not extremely exciting, but I'm very glad to be here and happy to talk about the subject.
Yeah, and Lawrence and Danny are partners as well. So
Mhm.
we have some discussion potentially there on relationship dynamics too. we'll sidebar with that.
The extent of my singing
and
experience is singing to our dog, actually, in our home. So
Perfect.
I promise, guys, I won't do that while we're on this call.
yeah, Savannah Voice Festival for the puppy. And my name is Dusty Church. I'm the chair of the board for First City Pride Center. First City Pride Center is the local LGBT community center here in Savannah. We're on Bull Street in the heart of the Starland District and offer no-cost mental and behavioral health programming, HIV testing, youth programs, support groups, and all sorts of great community events and programs as well, such as Savannah Pride, which is on the last weekend of October, Halloween weekend every year. So lots of fun stuff. I use he, him pronouns and identify as a gay man. And with that, let's kind of jump into language. I think probably before we go too far into talking about the show, we should define the words we use. And so, Lawrence, maybe you can help us with generating an understanding around the difference between gender and sex.
Okay, so the difference between gender and sex, at least for me, I've always believed that when you talk about sex, it's a very medical term. It's, what you're assigned by doctors at birth, and it relates to usually your genitalia and your chromosomes. And gender is unique to a person. It's how you identify, and it doesn't have to match up with your medically defined sex.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to offer any additional sort of thoughts on the perspective of gender versus sex?
Something that I came to a little later in life, but I'm very happy that I came to it, was being able to separate those two things and allow them both to coexist in my brain. And there is not a binary in sex either. Medically, there is not a binary, but even more so there, and more widely known probably now, there's not a binary in gender expression. And when I was living in a mental space where I was like, okay, it either has to be this or this, I felt really confined by that, and really like I was almost performing the role of being female, performing the role of being woman. And when I did a lot of research, and I talked to a lot of wonderful people who were further down their gender expression journey than me. And when I started to think differently and allowed myself to break out of the binary, it felt amazing. It felt really amazing. I think a lot of people find a lot of comfort in binary. I am not one of those people, and it's been really lovely to experience it as outside of male or female.
Yeah, that's terrific. And you're right about gender and sex both being not necessarily tied to the binary. We won't go into it here, but if you have some time on Google, intersex, 5-alpha reductase deficiency, there's all sorts of varying expressions in genitalia as well as expressions of gender. But on that, so you talked about your sense of playing the role of a woman. And so that kind of gets us into this discussion about gender identity and presentation as well. And maybe you could offer some thoughts around those terms as well.
Sure. For me, it has been woven in with opera from the beginning. And as I was singing opera in my 20s and kind of becoming a person in my 20s, I was performing as a mezzo. I perform roles that are stereotypically associated with men and roles that are stereotypically associated with women. And so I've been able to play with gender as part of my job, which has been so fun. And it kind of started there, and then I allowed it to be in my life also. But yeah, playing the role of a woman or of a man, like there are so many kind of unspoken codes about that in societies based on countries and histories and things like that. And some, like I said, some really work for people and some do not. And I have found that I feel more free to wear clothes that are stereotypically associated with women now that I identify as non-binary. And before I was like, well, I can only wear men's clothing because how will people know that I'm queer? How will people know? And now I have identified the way that I want to move through the world, I feel a lot freer to like, oh, okay, well, I'm non-binary regardless of wearing a dress or not. So I can just do whatever I want.
That's fantastic. Danny, can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on presentation and how you sort of define your style, how you define how you want the world to see you?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, this is a topic that I've, spoken with Lawrence about for a lot actually, as being somebody who, I think in my daily life gets seen as a cis dude quite often, right? I mean, like I'm consistently misgendered, actually, regardless of what I wear. And I know that a lot of the clothing decisions I do make are made, in my mind at least, in order to attempt to communicate to the world that I am in fact a woman, right? Whether or not I'm successful in that is not, there isn't necessarily a high rate of success given how many sirs I receive in public, I think. But yeah, I mean, that is something that is constantly on my mind. I mean, I like Heather said, there's all of these like minute and sometimes unnoticeable decisions, performative or otherwise, that go into, maybe not even decisions is the right word, but acts that go into our gender identity and how it is expressed in the world. And I don't know, I think as a trans person, those acts up to and including my style, my wacky earrings, the fact that I don't like sleeves. You know, for some reason in my mind, I identify my femness with not wearing sleeves these days. I don't know why. I mean, that's one of those constructed gender things that, like, these are the sorts of things that I am very much aware of, I think, now that I'm out as a trans person, to both myself and the world in ways that perhaps I hadn't done before. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it gives your perspective, which is what I think is really helpful, since for everyone, this is how we present to the world is unique, and how we want the world to see us, and the cues that we consciously or subconsciously put forward are part of who we are. So you talked about identifying as transgender. And Heather talked about identifying as non-binary, and I'll throw this out to whoever wants to answer, but maybe you can help us to frame cisgender, transgender, and non-binary, and define those terms for us.
Take it away.
I'll talk about it. Okay, so cisgender, I would define as somebody who identifies with the sex they're assigned at birth. They are on either end of the binary on the gender spectrum. They're either identify as a man or as a woman. And transgender is generally defined as somebody who does not identify with the sex they were given at birth. And it's not required, but a lot of people do decide to make changes via hormones or via surgery to identify as the other side of the spectrum. And non-binary is in between. You're somewhere in between the spectrum. There's lots of different labels and words, and I think ways that people identify as non-binary, and there's even trans people. I myself am one that I don't identify necessarily with a binary gender either. So that would be how I define it, if that helps.
Absolutely. Does anyone want to add to that?
Something I was actually talking with my family with yesterday was the ways that people feel as non-binary, and for me at least, I think I think people can feel like they belong to a third gender classification, and really identify and feel that that is where they belong. Non-binary for me is kind of like I've unsubscribed from gender in general, and I'm not like in between. It's I'm on a different field.
Off the spectrum. Yeah.
Yes, I am in down the street, around the corner, not playing on the same field at all. But it's different. It's different for everyone, and I think on the one hand, it can feel really overwhelming, perhaps, or confusing. But on the other hand, I think it's really exciting because you have to have conversations with people. You can't make assumptions and just think that you're on the same page with somebody, because you're not anyway. Nobody is. But I think this moment in time is kind of requiring a lot more conversations to happen, which is great.
Yeah, and I'd add to that too, that the way that each individual defines the binary, traditionally understood or otherwise, and the various coordinates on that binary are often unique to them, right? And you know, I had a conversation recently with a mutual friend that a mutual friend of Lawrence and I, that I like to lift weights, right? And so they found that my physique was incredibly masculine because of that, and they wanted to know if that, you know, in one way, shape, or form, maybe clashed with my sense of myself as a woman. And my response to that was to say, well, you know, I think what we need to imagine is the things that we take traditionally to be masculine and feminine, like perhaps somebody who lifts weights, right, is masculine. That in and of itself is a construction and is constantly in flux, right, depending upon the person that you're speaking to. And I think a large part of my own coming to like peace with my body as a trans woman has begun to understand that there is a femininity to this. You know, it isn't just oh well, I'm a woman, but you know, maybe my body's masculine. It's like, no, like I can redefine what is traditionally taken as masculine, either in terms of my weightlifter's physique or literally anything really, to be characteristic of my femininity, you know. And yeah, that does, like Heather said, it requires conversation, because suddenly every term that we have to describe one another, related to gender or otherwise, suddenly is up for grabs. Like it can be redefined at any moment. And I think people find that to be really destabilizing. I know I did at one point in my life, but I also think, like Heather said also, is that can be incredibly liberating too. So hopefully that's the conversation can be had both along both the lines of destabilizing and liberating, right? Yeah.
Yes, I can sort of also sympathize with the whole weightlifting and like not being feminine,
Yeah.
because as a cisgender woman, I love lifting weights also, and I remember back when I like had, huh?
Jessica's an amazing personal trainer. Just
Thank
little plug.
you. I remember when I like kind of started my weightlifting journey, and I was at the gym one day like pumping biceps, and this guy just came up to me and was like, why are you working on your biceps? I was like, why is it your problem? Like, because I want to be strong and I want a physicality that is of a strong person. Like, what? So it's like you can't win until everybody kind of breaks down their premonitions of what gender should be, and you know, their expectations of gender roles.
I
So
have
I
a
feel you on that.
question for you in terms of opera, Jess. I've like wanted to talk to you about this just in life too. I feel like there are a lot of stereotypes associated with different voice parts, which like we're moving away from that. But have you been able to find fluidity in the soprano roles that you sing? Any sort of gender fluidity, or like being able to, stereotypically soprano roles are like damsel in distress, unfortunately, but have you been like in situations where you have the freedom to play with that?
Um, I think so. I think more in like the comedic things like Cunegonde and Glitter and Be Gay. There's in comedy there's a lot more room for zany ideas and kind of being more fluid in any way you choose. But I think for the most part, the gatekeepers of the opera world are still very set in their ways. And if I do anything out of what's expected, they sort of raise an eyebrow. You know, even if it's not if it has nothing to do with gender, if it's something, if I'm presenting something that's a little bit more casual or colloquial, and they just, you know, think, oh, but this is supposed to be like a museum piece, and you're supposed to be like structured and poised, and I'm like, but they're just saying these things. These are the words that they're saying. So why can't I interpret that my own way? And so I think there's a lot. If I'm experiencing that as a cisgender woman, like I can only imagine the trouble that non-binary and trans and people on all sides of the spectrum of the LGBTQ community experience in these audition situations and performance situations, and it's a lot needs to change.
I was curious about that too. I mean, I will freely admit to being incredibly ignorant in terms of opera as well as like most musical theory in general. But when you guys were describing your voice ranges, I don't know, as somebody who I feel gets, you know, clocked as a trans person quite often due to my voice. I was like, I wonder how singing, you know, how the traditional ranges of singing get inflected through like a queer lens or not, you know, as the case may be, as you're describing. So that's interesting to hear about.
It is interesting. I feel like opera is a really gay friendly space, and it's not yet super queer, if that makes sense. Gay, like a lot of cis gay men have risen to the top in opera, which is amazing, and there is still lots of room for other gender expressions and other sexualities to have that kind of space in the room. I feel really lucky because but it also, there's a cognitive dissonance for mezzo sopranos. You play women and you play young boys typically. And I've played one trans woman, which is very exciting. But and it's drag. I mean, it's just absolutely, there's no question. When I play those roles, it feels like drag, and it feels very playful and very fun and not very serious. And yet at the same time, it is, like Jessica was saying, very can be very precious to some people. And it's almost like the art itself, which is so over the top and so dramatic, is regarded as something that's so like textbook and pure. And it's like, well, this is performing arts, you know? We're like having fun, we're putting on costumes and wigs, and we're all just kind of having fun and making loud noises. It's the like holiness of it. I think Jess and I are on the same page about that.
Yeah.
Maybe
At the
not.
end of the day, we're entertainers, you
Mm.
know, we're not scientists. So
I
On
will.
that
I will. Sorry.
sorry, no, go ahead, Lawrence, please.
I was just gonna say I will echo, as someone who does drag performances, that as being an entertainer and being able to play with that is very exciting. But even in the drag community, being a trans man is difficult to navigate, even though it's one of the most queer friendly spaces, or should be. There's still a blockade there. So I think the world in general and entertainment still has room to grow for sure.
So there is a show that's going to be performed, and included in that is an aria performed by Heather from As One.
Mhm.
Now, Heather, can you talk about, I think it's incredibly exciting that there is this performance of trans exploration in opera, and I think that that's really exciting to see, and I can't wait to see it. Can you tell us a little bit about the piece that's being performed, as well as the broader opera that it's from, and your experience in playing in that role, and how you relate to that experience personally?
Absolutely. So it's the opera is called As One, and it is by Laura Kaminsky, who is an amazing composer. She's also a lesbian, and is I maybe the only lesbian composer that I know well. It is a small, Jessica would know better, but
I'm
it's
trying
a
to rack my
small,
brain.
yeah, it's a small
I don't
circle.
want to throw out a name and then be wrong. So
Right. Also, like, let's not out anyone if you're not. But Laura is incredible, and wrote this piece about a real person, Kimberly Reed, who is a trans woman filmmaker who actually produced the documentary about Marsha P. Johnson that's on Netflix. So Kimberly Reed made a documentary about her own life, and then it was turned into an opera. That's kind of the short story of it. And it goes through childhood. There's a baritone who sings a lot of the arias that are from childhood, and then it kind of like shifts into the mezzo voice for later on. And the piece that I'm singing in the concert on Tuesday is when Hannah is the name of the character, and the names are Hannah before and Hannah after, which I think is a really, really graceful way to do that. And Hannah after is not going home for Christmas for the very first time. She's not going to see her family because she doesn't know how to be around her family as a trans woman yet, and is taking the space to be alone for the holidays. So she's alone in a coffee shop, and then she catches this guy's eye, and they flirt, and it's a really like innocent, like young love. There's a line that's nobody told me how to do this, how to flirt, as if one puberty wasn't awkward enough. Like, she's kind of going through a second puberty being a trans woman, and is really elated and full of butterflies. And it's a really, really touching piece. Everything kind of gets really quiet. The accompaniment is really sparse, and it's Christmas carols, but kind of like, it doesn't sound exactly like Christmas carols. It's just kind of subliminal. And so there's a nice mix of something familiar, but also experiencing something totally new and unexpected for Hannah. And yeah, I was in the show in July with Opera Maine, and it was incredible. I am not a trans woman, so there are lots of things about the show that I could not identify with, but there were so many lines that Laura and the librettist Mark Campbell wrote that I was like, yes, I get it. There's uh, another aria where where somebody says, "Pardon me, miss," and she just like starts this amazing aria, just freaking out that somebody called her miss. She's so excited about it, and there's a part that's, and I feel a rush of contentment for once. All the jarring voices resolve in harmony, because I'm finally perceived as I am. And learning the piece, I really thought more than I ever had about, you are whoever you are on the inside, but then you can't exist in a vacuum. And kind of the human experience is trying to get other people to see you the way that you see yourself. And so how many layers does that involve? Like your haircut, your clothing, your gender identity, the relationships that you have, the jobs that you have. How many different things and different ways can you exist in the world, hoping that the outside will match the inside? So I definitely related to that, um, and the work that is required of that too, the inside work to then be able to communicate yourself to people in an honest way. So I'm excited to do it. But we're also doing some other things on the concert that are traditionally performed by low-voiced singers, so typically male singers, and I think that is a really exciting thing too. And so much of the roles in opera are for low voices. There are way more roles, just statistically, for low voices than there are for high voices, and I don't think that needs to happen. That there are certain roles that's like, okay, it doesn't matter. Why does this matter? It just happened to be written low. Wait, we could give it to somebody with a high voice. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
I think we'll touch a little bit on that in this concert too, in a playful way.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm so glad that what was originally presented to me as just kind of a girl power concert has now morphed into sort of a more gender exploration kind of concert. We're exploring like the traditional roles where women are kind of in drag as these young men, and so we have a whole section on that and how that sort of crosses gender. But then we have, like Heather mentioned, roles that are actually performed by men, like Lancelot in Camelot sings "If Ever I Would Leave You," and Heather is doing us the honor of singing that as a non-binary person, which I'm super excited about. Um, and so it's not even like it's just like the gender roles and the fluidity of all of it is sort of woven both thematically and just as like at face value in the concert, and I hope people kind of pick up on all the details.
Yeah, that's incredible. And in talking ahead of this, when we were exchanging notes back and forth, you had mentioned that this show really covers a really wide range of subjects, from pregnancy and fertility, mental health, ageism, believing survivors, in addition to the sort of very upfront gender exploration with As One. But it made me think about all of these things sort of often tie to uh, benchmarks in our lives, that there's this map we're supposed to follow and a timeline we're supposed to meet, and things that we're supposed to do by certain ages with certain people, and it's all planned before we ever escape the womb. And I'm curious from the perspective of Heather, Danny, and Lawrence, all of you, not identifying with that cis role, how you've sort of experienced and have confronted those timelines that society said you're supposed to meet. Um, Heather, do you want to start?
What a great question. I haven't thought about that. I've experienced it more so far, at least, in the way that people flippantly talk about, like, oh well, women are used to men being whatever, fill in the blank. And it is so fun to be like, oh, not me. I'm not a woman. So I'm sorry if your relationship sucks, but it sounds like your relationship doesn't seem like you need to make that a blanket statement for everyone who subscribes to a certain gender. So that has made me just shift to see things on more person to person level. But in terms of timelines, I'll have to think about that. Come back to me.
And Danny and Lawrence being partners, and I'm sure discussions around fertility and long-term planning and all of that has come up at some point. How do you sort of maneuver and map your own course?
Well, go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say, I have a lot to say about the topic, so I'll
Yeah,
try and be brief about it. Yeah, due to transitioning, I do feel a little bit behind in my life in general, just because I feel like I didn't understand what my gender was until about 10 years ago. And I've grown a lot since then, but before that, there's a lot of things that we're just missing and I'm still catching up on. And being a trans person, being specifically a trans man, the issues of pregnancy and fertility are also still very important because a lot of people don't know that even if you're taking testosterone, you can still get pregnant. It's not birth control. A lot of women's issues cross over into trans issues too. And I think maybe part of that is just changing language, changing how we use language, but there are a lot of things that pertain to people that you wouldn't know, again, like Heather was saying, unless you have a conversation with them. So.
Yeah, my experience of those hallmarks, I mean, like I can definitely relate to something I'm sorry, I keep quoting Heather, I apologize for that, I don't mean to put you on blast, but in relation to the song that you spoke of earlier, how this trans person goes through a second puberty. And, I've had that experience as like a 36-year-old going through, I mean, I'm wearing like hot dog earrings for Christ's sake, that I bought from Target. So like, I'm still there. I hope in terms of my jewelry decisions that I never get out of it, but because I think it's a lot of fun, but like, yeah, I mean, in terms of fertility and long-term planning, I don't think this should come as a surprise to my partner. I've never been interested in having children, so but there is this fascination of growing up in a household where I have two older brothers who have gone through basically all of those expected timelines as mature adults. They've owned houses, they've started families, they've gotten married, and some, one of them at least has gotten divorced and remarried and such. And as somebody who has had to, I'd say, negotiate my identity in terms of both my sexuality and my gender, I do feel like those sorts of questions that arise during adulthood for maybe a lot of people, at least in the American context, were put on the back burner for me because I was still attempting to figure out like very basic aspects of who I was, as I moved through my young adulthood, right? So I mean that sense of feeling behind certainly occurs to me at times. Sometimes like I feel badly about that. Sometimes I'm like, well, I'm exactly where I need to be, so I guess it just depends on what moment you find me, but yeah.
Well, I will say you are exactly where you need to be.
Thank you.
So I know we're running out of time, so I will wrap it up, but I just want to thank each of you. Start with Jessica. Thank you so much for producing this show and giving space to communities to talk about these issues and to explore gender. Thank you, Heather, for your willingness to be open with us about your performance, about your relationship to the roles that you are cast in. And of course, thank you, Danny and Lawrence, so much for being so open and being willing to talk to us about your personal experiences with gender. I hope that folks are able to take away from this a sense that we are all who we're supposed to be.
Mhm.
And that's it.
And well, thank you, Dusty. Thank you so much for collaborating with the Savannah Voice Festival on this enlightening conversation that I think will be really, really helpful for a lot of people.
Oh
Mhm.
my gosh, absolutely. I want to do panels. I said this, there was a panel discussion for As One, and now doing this, like, I want there to be a panel discussion after every opera,
Mhm.
because like I'm doing 2 other contracts this year where I'm playing a prostitute. Like, I would like a panel discussion to talk about how that feels. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Should
Totally.
have that.
like I think this only helps, regardless of if a show is about queer issues. I think this kind of stuff only helps for everyone.
We all have fascinating lives that we live, and you know, we're all very unique. I am just blessed to be on this. It's been so nice to hear all of your thoughts, and it's been wonderful to meet you both, Heather and Jessica.
Likewise.
So thank you all, and I'll let you guys go. I know you have rehearsals to get to, so
Yes,
thank
we have
you
Femme
again.
rehearsal.
Exactly. Yes.
All right.
Thank you guys for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having
Thank
us.
you
It was fun
all.
to meet
Thank you
Thank you
so
all.
much.
Yeah.